What if every fairy tale you ever loved, every story of towers, slippers, enchanted sleep, and forbidden fruit, was not born from a writer's imagination but pulled from the ashes of lost temples, carved on stone by forgotten hands? What if those tales were not merely for comfort or imagination, but encoded warnings and memories older than written history itself? Tonight, I invite you to cross the threshold of time and enter the shadowed archives of ancient Babylon, where nothing is ever only a story. When did Rapunzel's tower first rise in the silence of the desert? How did a monster's love and a merchant's fear echo through palaces where gods once walked? Who taught our ancestors the lesson of the red shoes, where ecstasy and danger blur until the dance can only end in darkness? Somewhere in the clay tablets buried under millennia of earth are clues about bread trails left in ancient forests, cities that sleep under thorny mountains, and secrets exchanged in the language of dreams. Who spun the first thread that would become these stories? Why were some truths hidden as riddles, others as songs, and some only shared by those who risked too much for a glimpse at the divine? What if your favorite fairy tale was a puzzle piece, a shard chipped from the oldest puzzle humanity has ever known? The dust still clings to my boots and the questions glow in the lamplight. Step forward with me. What waits at the heart of the labyrinth might change everything you think you know about the meaning and purpose of the stories we carry. Dawn had only just begun to seep into the Mesopotamian horizon when I pressed my boots into the mud of Borsippa. Mist clung to the ruins like a veil, heavy, silent, stubborn. Before me rose the broken bones of the ancient ziggurat, 7 terraces of time-worn bricks, each layer resting atop the last, a step pyramid older than the stories carved into its sides. This was the Tong Tower, dedicated to Nabu, the Babylonian god of wisdom and writing, once encased with bricks of brilliant blue glaze, gleaming like lapis under desert suns. Even in ruin, the tower's silhouette carves a bold line against the blank plain, 40 meters of memory still holding their ground after thousands of years. That morning, the wind pulled the scent of baking earth and bitter reeds across the heaps of fallen masonry. My guide, Tariq, led me along a path lined with pottery shards and the haunted echoes of prayers spoken in Sumerian tongues. Near the southern wall, half buried under a curtain of sand and root, we found it, a stone relief, overlooked by scholars and shepherds alike. I brushed away the powder, revealing a woman's face at the summit of a rendered tower, her hair flowing down its sides, not as ringlets, but as thick ropes. Local elders have whispered the tale for centuries. They speak of a priestess, not a damsel in distress, nor a witch, but a keeper of secrets. In the Babylonian night, it was said, she climbed to the tower's crown to send messages to the stars, her hair serving as the bridge between earth and sky. She became the living tether, channeling wisdom not meant for mortal minds. Strange marks trailed beneath her, cuneiform glyphs winding like river reeds at the base of the tower. I drew charcoal prints by lamplight as the desert trembled with the cool hush that comes before sunrise. The inscription was unlike the edicts and inventories so common in this region. It spoke of watching, of longing, of forbidden knowledge granted in a moment of need. The story wasn't about confinement or punishment as in the later fairy tales I grew up with. Instead, it warned that transcending the domain of the gods, even briefly, came with a cost generations would carry. The echoes of her defiance and her price reverberated through time like footfalls on ancient stone. Rapunzel, I thought, recalling the fairy tales etched in the pages of childhood books. But here, in this dry silence, the myth was not one of rescue or romantic deliverance, but of sacrifice and secret wisdom, forbidden yet tantalizing. I traced the woman's face with my thumb, the clay still cool and stubborn beneath the morning sun, wondering how many pilgrims had looked up and imagined the sky speaking back. As sunlight rose higher and dust motes began their bright, silent swirl, I felt the strange pull of old stories layered beneath newer tellings. The tower's myth had traveled far, mutating with each retelling, growing softer, safer, less dangerous. Yet at its root, the warning endured that not all towers are prisons, and not all witches are evil. Some simply guard the knowledge that could undo us. From the stone relief, the line threads outwards, carrying us from Mesopotamia into the next legend, the next mystery, waiting just beyond the bread-scented heat of the Cedar Forest, where another familiar tale takes on an altogether stranger hue. Three months after leaving the ruins at Borsippa, I stood in the dim, climate-controlled vault of the British Museum's restricted archives, the kind of room where the air itself feels precious and measured. Rows of steel shelving stretched into shadow, each shelf burdened with fragments of clay and stone, voices from vanished empires waiting for someone to listen. The curator, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses and fingers permanently stained with archive dust, had led me to a wooden drawer marked only with a catalog number from 1923. Inside, nestled in foam, lay a tablet no larger than my hand. The label read, "Administrative Record, Probable Tax Receipt." But the moment I tilted it toward the light and began reading the wedge-shaped impressions pressed into its surface, I knew the label was wrong. This was no tax record. It was a fragment of the Epic of Gilgamesh, one of humanity's oldest surviving stories. Yet this particular passage had never appeared in any published translation. My pulse quickened as I traced the cuneiform with gloved fingers, each symbol a small doorway into the ancient past. The text described the journey of Gilgamesh and his companion Enkidu into the Cedar Forest, that dark and holy place guarded by the demon Humbaba, where the heroes would prove their courage and carve their names into immortality. But this version included a detail I had never encountered before. Enkidu, ever practical, marked their path through the endless forest by breaking pieces of bread from their provisions and dropping them at intervals, ensuring they could retrace their steps after confronting the guardian demon. It was a strategy born of caution, of understanding that even heroes can become lost. But the birds came, drawn by the scent of grain and hunger older than memory. They descended in flocks and devoured every crumb. When Gilgamesh and Enkidu emerged victorious from their battle with Humbaba, they found their trail erased. The forest closed around them, indifferent to their glory. For days they wandered, circling through groves of cedar that all looked identical, their water running low, their triumph turning to desperation. Only the intervention of the sun god Shamash, moved by their plight, revealed the path home. I set the tablet down carefully, my hands trembling slightly. Hansel and Gretel, the European fairy tale of two children lost in the woods, marking their way with breadcrumbs, only to have birds eat the trail. The structure was identical. the mistake, the birds, the peril of being lost, all mirrored here in a text carved 1,500 years before the Common Era. This was not coincidence. This was transmission, a story carried across millennia, passed from Sumerian scribes to Babylonian priests to traveling merchants and wandering storytellers, mutating with each retelling but preserving its essential truth. The lesson was clear and timeless. The natural world does not honor human plans. Birds will eat your breadcrumbs. Rivers will wash away your cairns. The forest does not care about your heroism or your need to return home. And yet we try, again and again, to mark our paths through the wilderness, to impose order on chaos, to believe that cleverness alone can save us. I thought of every child who had heard the tale of Hansel and Gretel, absorbing without knowing it a warning 4,000 years old. Do not rely on what can be taken. Do not trust that the world will preserve your escape route. And perhaps most importantly, do not enter the forest unless you are willing to be changed by it, to emerge as someone different than who you were, or perhaps not to emerge at all. As I carefully returned the tablet to its foam bed, I wondered how many other fragments lay mislabeled in archives around the world. How many other threads of connection waited to be pulled? Because if this story had survived, what else might be hidden, waiting for the right eyes to recognize it? The next piece of the puzzle was calling me to Istanbul, to a private collection recently recovered from the black market, where a cylinder seal would reveal another familiar tale in an altogether unfamiliar light. I arrived in Istanbul just as dusk sealed the city in golden haze, the Bosphorus glimmering beside the ancient domes and steeples. A private collection, recently recovered from the labyrinthine black market, had drawn me into a room lit by the cold gleam of museum glass, where lost treasures waited beneath velvet cloths. Among them rested a cylinder seal, smaller than my thumb, yet heavier with myth than any crown. On its delicate surface, masterfully rendered grooves told a story. There was Inanna, goddess of love, war, and transformation, descending a grand staircase, her garments shivering with primordial light. The inscription, painstakingly verified, spoke her name: Inanna, Queen of Heaven and Earth, beloved of Uruk. At the bottom of the stairs, captured mid-flight, lay a single sandal radiating lines, like the morning star she embodied, illuminating her passage from the divine to the mortal. I leaned closer, savoring the sharp tang of ancient stone and ink as the professor recounted the legend. Inanna, cloaked in the 7 me of cosmic power, slipped into the gods' revel dressed as a mortal, a jewel among mortals. At midnight, as fate pressed close, she vanished, leaving her sandal behind, a vessel for her essence, a sign for the divine consort Dumuzi to seek her. But unlike the tales spun in France or China, the original story pulsed with uncertainty and risk. To step into divine shoes meant courting transformation, bargaining with forces older than time itself. This story chimes through the ages. In Perrault's Cinderella, in China's Ye Xian, always the lost shoe, always the moment of reckoning at midnight, always the test of identity. The seal's magic was not in granting wishes or conjuring romance, but in marking a boundary, the razor-thin edge between the world we know and the world we cannot see. To claim the shoe was to accept the challenge of becoming other, of being recognized, not simply rescued. On the reverse side of the seal, another scene called to me. It depicted twin images, two figures entwined, one crowned and radiant, one shadowed and veiled, holding between them a shape like spun glass. The professor suggested it was the moment of transformation, the pivot wherein power passes hands, blessing or doom radiating outward. I traced its grooves, the sense of anticipation spiking in my chest. The room seemed to tilt. I felt, for a moment, the weight of every fairy story ever told, the way identities are tested, lost, restored, how the stroke of midnight can split destiny in two. Every culture carries its own version, but here, beneath my fingertips, lay evidence that the pattern was ancient, etched in stone long before the old kingdoms fell. Yet, the seal posed new riddles. Who truly claimed the lost sandal? What price did they pay for crossing from the mortal to the divine? And above all, what secrets had been whispered in the moment between slipping off the shoe and stepping into a new fate? As Istanbul's night deepened outside and the lamplight flickered on polished stone, I knew my journey was nowhere near its end. For every story recovered from Babylon's dust, another waited, coiled in shadow, ready to reveal how far fairy tales can stretch, past kingdoms, past continents, past memory itself. The next fragment lay behind the dark and sleeping mountain, where cursed cities dream in silence and thorn bushes grow tall. The cylinder seal would not let me rest. On its reverse side, pressed into stone with deliberate care, lay an image I could not immediately decipher. A mountain split open like fruit, revealing chambers within. Inside those chambers, rows of figures lay horizontal, unmoving, their arms crossed over their chests in the posture of eternal sleep. Above them, a thorn bush stretched its branches across the entrance, sealing them from the world outside. The cuneiform was damaged, weathered by millennia of handling and burial, but I pieced together enough fragments to understand the horror and wonder it described. A curse, a kingdom, a city swallowed by divine wrath and hidden beneath a barrier no mortal could penetrate. The name etched faintly into the stone was Cutha, a city sacred to Nergal, the Mesopotamian god of death, plague, and the underworld. The legend unfolded slowly over 4 months of research, each fragment adding another layer to the story. I chased references through museums in Berlin, London, and Baghdad, cross-referencing tablets that had been cataloged separately but belonged to the same narrative tradition. The tale spoke of a king of Cutha who had offended Nergal through arrogance, refusing to honor the god's festivals, declaring himself more powerful than death itself. In response, Nergal descended and cursed the entire city. The city did not crumble, it simply stopped. Markets froze mid-transaction. Children paused mid-laugh. The entire population entered what the scribes called the long silence, a state between life and death where breath was so shallow it could not be detected, where hearts beat only once per hour. To protect the sleeping city from looters and invaders, Nergal caused a mountain of thorns to grow around it overnight, impenetrable, immortal, guarding the cursed until the appointed time. The texts specified that only a hero, one marked by the gods and pure of purpose, could pass through the thorns without being torn to pieces. This hero would enter the silent city, find the king's chamber at its heart, and break the curse through an act of recognition or sacrifice. The details varied between fragments, but the core remained constant: sleep, thorns, and the promise of awakening after 100 years had passed. Sleeping Beauty. The European fairy tale of the cursed princess, the spinning wheel, the century of slumber, and the wall of thorns that grows around the castle, protecting and imprisoning her simultaneously. The structure was identical, the symbolism parallel. What began as a collective punishment for a city's hubris had become, over thousands of years, the story of a single girl pricked by fate and suspended in time. But the Babylonian version carried a darker edge. It insisted the city was real, that Cutha truly existed, hidden beneath the deserts of southern Iraq, its inhabitants still sleeping, waiting for a hero who had never come. The scribes recorded coordinates, directions from known landmarks, instructions for those brave or foolish enough to seek it. I traced those directions on modern maps, overlaying ancient geography with satellite imagery, and found anomalies, irregularities in the desert floor, depressions that might indicate collapsed structures. As I worked late into the night, the question haunted me. What if they were right? What if somewhere beneath the endless dunes, a city still sleeps, its markets frozen, its children paused mid-play, waiting for someone to break a curse 4,000 years old? And if that part of the story was true, what else had been dismissed as myth when it was actually memory, record disguised as fable? The line between history and legend blurred in that archive room. I felt the weight of every sleeping figure carved into that seal, their stone faces patient and terrible. The fairy tale had softened the edges, turned collective doom into individual romance, replaced a god's wrath with a fairy's slight. But the bones of the story remained, teaching the same lesson across millennia. Some sleeps are unnatural, some curses endure, and awakening is not guaranteed simply because time has passed. My next discovery would take me deeper still, into a temple dedicated to a god whose name had been erased, where I would find that the tale of Beauty and the Beast conceals truths far stranger than talking furniture and enchanted roses. It was in the muted ruin fields of Uruk that I next found myself, among shadows that seemed to cling to the toppled columns and the scorched stones. Uruk, where the great walls once stood, where the wilds met civilization, where the gods walked beneath palms and temples. Here, I traced the trail of an obliterated name, a god once inscribed in the liturgies but now rubbed smooth by centuries of erasure. We camped near a platform of ancient limestone, where the air grew heavy with the scent of scorched earth and distant myrrh. On the fourth day, behind a row of toppled statues, I uncovered the edge of a foundation stone, so deep and forgotten that only a crescent of cuneiform was visible. Guided by lamplight and patience, I revealed slow lines telling the story of the beast of the threshold, a divine guardian cast out from the company of the gods for a transgression whose specifics were shrouded in ritual code. Pride or mercy no scholar could say for certain. Banished from the cosmic order, the guardian existed in a twilight palace spanning the realm of mortals and the realm of shadows. He took a monstrous form, neither animal nor man, his features sculpted to provoke awe or terror in any who crossed his path. Mortals who trespassed, by design or by fate, would find themselves at his mercy. To be spared, the tale revealed, a terrible price was required. One day, a merchant, desperate and lost, stumbled into the palace on a night when the moon hung low and coppery. The beast, bound by duty yet longing for release, demanded the merchant's daughter, not as a prisoner, but as a guest whose honest gaze could see past his monstrous form. The daughter chose to go, guided by a blend of filial sacrifice and curiosity the text described as the pure fire. In the shadowed palace, fear transformed to sympathy, then to compassion, then, inevitably, to something deeper, that ancient draw between worlds set apart. The girl learned the rules of the threshold, the secret names, the patterns of mercy behind brute strength. By loving what was monstrous, she unwound the spell. Yet, in the oldest Babylonian version, the ending was sharp. To look upon the realm of the divine, even for love, is to leave the mortal world behind. The merchant's daughter gained insight, but, marked forever by the between world, could not fully return. She became the veiled attendant of the beast, witness and guardian at the edge of mortal understanding. The echoes were unmistakable, the structure later taken up in Beauty and the Beast and its many relatives across Indo-European folklore. Over centuries, these stories softened, granting happy endings where ancient truths insisted upon sacrifice and the limits of human curiosity. The mythic structure is much older than the French literary tradition, older even than Greece's Cupid and Psyche. Each retelling traces back to primal sources along the sun-baked roots of Mesopotamia, encoded with the warnings and aspirations of those who first dreamed of gods and monsters. As I lingered, dusk burning low across the plain and bats weaving among the broken lintels, I wondered how many other stones might be hiding tales so familiar, yet so fundamentally altered by time and translation. The question pressed close. When we tell stories of transformation and love, what ancient bargains do we echo? The journey would soon pull me to the north, to Nineveh, where a spindle, delicate and sharp, waited to change another girl's fate. Nineveh rose before me like a ghost wrapped in memory, its mounds and broken walls stretching across the plain near modern Mosul. Once the greatest city in the world, Nineveh had been the shining capital of the Neo-Assyrian Empire, home to gardens, palaces, and the legendary library of Ashurbanipal, where knowledge from across the ancient world had been gathered and preserved on clay tablets. Now, it lay half buried beneath centuries of dust, a city remembered more through biblical prophecy than through the glory it once commanded. I had come seeking fragments of a specific ritual, one mentioned only obliquely in medical and religious texts scattered across collections in London and Baghdad. The locals called the site cursed, warning me not to disturb what slept beneath the tell of Kuyunjik, where the ancient palaces once stood. But I pressed on, guided by references to something the scribes called the Needle of Fate. It was a spindle, sacred and deadly, used by priestesses of Ishtar in divination ceremonies that blurred the line between life and death. The texts described it with precision, a bronze instrument, delicate yet sharp, used to spin flax into thread during rituals of initiation. Young girls, not yet fully trained in the mysteries, would be brought before the spindle as part of their preparation for priesthood. The ceremony required absolute readiness, spiritual and physical, because to touch the spindle before one's time, to prick one's finger on its point, was to glimpse the underworld itself. The medical texts were explicit. A girl who pricked her finger would fall into a trance indistinguishable from death. Her breathing would slow to near imperceptibility. Her skin would cool. She would appear lifeless, and yet some essence of her would wander the realm of Ereshkigal, goddess of the underworld, walking among the shades and spirits until a priest skilled in sacred chants could call her soul back to the living world. Some initiates returned changed, marked by what they had seen. Others never woke at all. The symbolism was layered and profound. The spindle represented the thread of life spun by the gods, measured and cut according to divine will. To touch it unprepared was to confront one's own mortality before the appointed hour, to see the pattern of fate that should remain hidden from mortal eyes. The blood drawn by the prick was not accidental, it was sacrificial, an offering that opened the door between worlds. I thought of Sleeping Beauty, the fairy tale known across Europe, where a princess pricks her finger on a spinning wheel and falls into an enchanted sleep for 100 years. The spindle, the blood, the death-like trance, the awakening, all of it echoed the Babylonian ritual with uncanny precision. What had been dismissed as fantasy, as the invention of medieval storytellers, was in fact the distant memory of an actual practice performed in temples like the ones whose ruins surrounded me. But the original was not a curse cast by a vengeful fairy. It was a test. An initiation into mysteries that required the initiate to cross the threshold of death and return transformed. The European versions had softened it, turned spiritual ordeal into romantic slumber, replaced the underworld with a rose-covered castle. Yet the core remained, encoded in narrative. The sharp point, the blood, the long sleep, and the understanding that some knowledge can only be gained by those willing to risk everything. As I stood among the fallen stones of Nineveh, the wind carrying the scent of dry earth and ancient ash, I held a fragment of a bronze spindle in my gloved hand. It was corroded, pitted with age, but still sharp enough to pierce skin. I wondered how many girls had held this same object, their hearts pounding as they approached the moment of testing. How many had seen the realm beyond and returned to tell of it? And how many lay forever in the shadow between worlds, their stories lost except for the faint echo preserved in a fairy tale? The thread that connected ancient Babylon to modern Europe was gossamer thin but unbroken, spun by hands long turned to dust, carrying warnings and wisdom we no longer fully understand. But there were other threads to follow. Other stories that had danced their way across millennia, and the next would lead me to a discovery both beautiful and terrible, red as blood and just as dangerous. The trail led me next to Paris, to a private collection housed in a narrow building near the Sorbonne, where artifacts deemed too minor for major museums found quiet refuge. The curator, an older woman with silver hair and tired eyes, led me through dim corridors to a climate-controlled storage room. There, on a velvet cushion, rested a pair of ceramic shoes, small enough to fit a child of perhaps 10 or 12 years. They were painted bright red, the color still vivid after millennia, the glaze catching the light like fresh blood. She explained. They had been discovered in the 1930s during excavations near Babylon, recovered from a mass grave containing the remains of young girls. The skeletons showed signs of extreme physical stress, exhaustion so profound it had left marks on the bones themselves, compression fractures in the feet, worn cartilage in the knees and hips, hearts enlarged beyond normal size. These were not children who had died peacefully. They had died in motion, driven past the body's capacity to endure. The curator had no explanation for the shoes, or why they were found on the feet of the dead. But I did, because I had spent weeks translating temple records that spoke of a cult devoted to Ishtar, the goddess of love, war, fertility, and transformation. The texts described rituals of ecstatic transcendence, ceremonies where worshippers sought to leave the mortal body behind and merge with the divine through sustained, frenzied movement. The ritual began with purification. The initiates, young girls chosen for their devotion and stamina, would fast for 3 days, drinking only sacred water blessed by the priests. On the 4th day at dawn, they would be dressed in white linen and brought to the temple courtyard. There, the high priestess would place upon their feet a pair of red shoes, ceramic or leather, dyed with cinnabar and ochre, blessed in blood rituals meant to channel the goddess's power. Once the shoes were on, the dance began. Drums pounded, flutes sang. The girls would move in patterns taught by generations of priestesses, whirling and leaping, their feet tracing sacred geometries on the temple floor. The red shoes were not merely symbolic. They were believed to be inhabited by the goddess herself, guiding the wearer's steps, pulling them deeper into the trance state where mortal and divine became one. But the ritual carried a terrible risk. Once the red shoes were blessed and placed upon the feet, the dancer could not stop. To stop was to reject the goddess, to turn away from transcendence, and such refusal would bring divine wrath. The dancers were compelled to continue hour after hour until they achieved the sacred state of dissolution, or until their bodies failed. The texts were clear. Many achieved transcendence, their spirits departing to dwell with Ishtar forever. Others simply collapsed and died, their hearts unable to sustain the pace, their feet bleeding through the red shoes until blood and dye became indistinguishable. I stood before those small red shoes, feeling the weight of every story I had ever heard about cursed objects, about shoes that would not let their wearers rest. Hans Christian Andersen's tale of the girl who put on red shoes and danced until a woodsman cut off her feet to save her life, it had always seemed like a moral fable about vanity and pride. But now I understood it was something far older and far darker, a cultural memory of real girls who danced themselves to death in the name of the goddess. The fairy tale had sanitized the ritual, turned sacred devotion into sinful pride, replaced divine ecstasy with punishment. But the core remained, the warning encoded in narrative: do not put on the red shoes unless you are prepared to dance until the end. Because once the gods take hold, they do not let go gently. The choice to transcend is also the choice to surrender, and not everyone who makes that choice returns. As I left the collection that evening, the red shoes glowing in my memory like embers, I wondered how many other warnings had been hidden in fairy tales, how many other rituals had been remembered as cautionary stories. The thread pulled me forward, deeper into the labyrinth of forgotten practices, and the next discovery would take me into the marshlands of southern Iraq, where a house made of bread concealed horrors that time had tried and failed to bury. The path to the next fragment of Mesopotamian memory lay not in stone, but in clay, baked, glazed, and painted to resemble food. After months of negotiating permissions and deciphering forgotten catalog numbers, I was granted access to the sealed excavation records of Site X, a dig abandoned in the southern marshlands of Iraq just before World War II. The room where I read the reports was cool, dim, and silent except for the hum of fluorescent lights and the faint, sweet tang of mildew. The first photograph startled me. the remains of a building, small but meticulously constructed, with walls made of clay bricks shaped into loaves, fruits, cakes, all styles of food that would tempt a hungry child. The bricks bore traces of colored glaze, many still shining despite 4,000 years of burial, giving the unmistakable impression of a house made from bread and sweets. Inside, the archaeological teams found the skeletons of children, dozens of them, scattered across the floor, some clutching traces of dried fruit in their tiny fists. The bones told a story of ritual death, cuts, burns, and signs of cannibalism too deliberate to be accidental. The reports linked the site to Lamashtu, the demoness of nightmares, sickness, and child-devouring hunger, feared across Mesopotamia for her power to slip into homes and snatch the young from their sleep. The locals called the place the House of Lamashtu, telling stories about a temple that lured children with promises of sweetness, only to consume their innocence and sometimes their flesh. Ritual offerings of bread, honey, and fruit were regularly made to appease her, or at festival times tempt her to focus her attentions away from the community. The texts described complicated rituals. Bread was more than food. It was currency, reward, and offering, baked and shaped according to elaborate traditions preserved in temple kitchens. For ordinary people, bread meant safety and status, but for those called by cult or curse, especially children, the sweetness could become a snare. Priests of Lamashtu constructed the bread house not as a place of protection, but as a mechanism of ritual predation. Children entered drawn by the irresistible promise, and were never seen again. When European fairy tales reimagined this horror as the gingerbread house in Hansel and Gretel, the reality had long been faded by time and retelling. The story of tempting sweetness, the devouring witch, and children who escaped by cleverness echoed a far older warning for parents and their young. Never trust what looks sweet. Danger hides behind the promise of plenty and can be ritualized, justified, even celebrated if society is sufficiently desperate or afraid. The photographs, vivid and grainy, showed the bricks glinting in artificial light, a visual echo of the enchantment preserved for thousands of years. I sat in silence, thinking about every story designed to warn children away from certain places and certain kinds of greed. Fairy tales soften the grisly edges, but some lessons cannot be entirely erased. Trust earned in hunger can be easily misplaced, and sweetness itself may be the mask evil chooses most often. As I closed the archive folder, the air grew heavy. Would the next discovery lead deeper into darkness, into caves haunted by predators in disguise, and stories that warn not only against hunger, but also against trusting the wrong face? The answer, I suspected, would wait in the mountains north of the old river valleys, where the legend of the wolf in grandfather's clothing waited to unveil its teeth. Northward, the journey led me into the mountains of Kurdistan, a region marked by sharp valleys and caves that locals claimed were haunted by ancient voices and unquiet spirits. These hidden places held stories the villagers were reluctant to tell, whispers carried on wind that pressed cold fingers through the ruins. In the shadow of a limestone overhang, I found carvings and traces of old settlements dating back to the Akkadian period, a time when stories moved over borders as swiftly as the wolves that stalked the night. Within a deep cave, far from the village trails, the walls were marked by images both strange and oddly familiar. A figure, upright, with the head of a wolf and the body dressed in fine robes, gripped a staff and watched over scenes of feasting and mourning. Cuneiform, etched beside the figure, gave him the title Servant of Nergal, tying him to the underworld and the cycles of death and judgment so important in Mesopotamian myth. Written legends described the wolf as a cunning trickster and a tester of mortals, capable of assuming human form and infiltrating homes by masquerading as a traveler, a merchant, or, most disturbingly, a relative returned from a long journey. To invite him inside, to drop one's guard, was to risk the safety of all within. The ancient stories contended that the true test was not strength, but wisdom. Only those who recognized the predator beneath the guise, who trusted their fear and questioned appearances, would survive the trial. The wolf as a shapeshifter appears across countless tales. In Babylonian lore, the goddess Ishtar is said to have transformed a spurned lover into a wolf, condemning him forever to hunger outside the safety of his home, chased not just by shepherds but by his own kin. Elsewhere, transformations could be a punishment or a blessing. Some stories link the wolf's testing of mortals with themes of hospitality and betrayal, warning against inviting the unknown and the unexamined indoors. These motifs descend directly into the fairy tales of Europe. Little Red Riding Hood is, at its heart, a test of discernment and instinct. The wolf in grandmother's clothing, a memory of older stories, where survival depended on seeing through illusion and heeding inner warnings. The cave's carvings and the fragments of text presented the wolf not merely as a monster, but as an agent of moral trial. Survival required more than bravery. It demanded the ability to see what lies beneath the surface, to ask questions, to trust a healthy suspicion of the strange and the unfamiliar. As dusk crept along the jagged cliffs, the cold wind carried down the old lesson: fear, rightly placed, can be a guardian. Sometimes the greatest peril is not outside our door, but waiting for us to let it in. Fairy tales have gentled the wolf, made him the vessel of suspense for children's stories. But his ancient form was never meant to reassure. It was designed to keep, to test, and to teach. And as I emerged from the cave's darkness, I saw the next trail leading toward the gleam of royal courts, where greed and luck entwined like golden eggs within the clutch of a miraculous bird. The sands of time sometimes swirl into the corridors of power, where myth and warning converge. My next journey took me to the architecture of royal caution, a sealed Babylonian tablet housed in the Louvre, passed from hand to cautious hand since its purchase from a Baghdad dealer in the 19th century. Across its surface, geometric cuneiform symbols unraveled a tale woven through palaces and marketplaces, one of magic, greed, and divine consequences. The tablet told of a king who captured a miraculous bird, the bird of endless wealth, which laid golden eggs in his royal gardens. At first, the king honored the gift, taking only one egg each day, using the gold for temples and for the poor. But prosperity bred hunger for more. Tempted by the gleam and the promise of absolute power, he demanded greater riches, forcing the goose to lay several eggs in a day. When the bird could only manage its natural rhythm, the king, driven by insatiable desire, killed the goose to seize all the eggs at once, only to find its magic had vanished. The palace was left with nothing but lifeless feathers and empty hands. Inscribed at the bottom of the tablet was a bitter line: "Greed does not multiply blessings, it ends them." The myth vibrates with themes found across ancient lore: transcending cultures from Egypt to Greek creation stories, were cosmic eggs and world birds birth gods, stars, and kingdoms. The egg in Mesopotamia, often golden or luminous, was more than an object of wealth. It symbolized divine favor, fertility, and life's generative power. Those who misunderstood its nature brought ruin not only on themselves but on their wisdom. The motif moves unmistakably into European fairy tales, most famously the story of the goose that laid the golden eggs. The moral, smoothed by time but still edged with warning, remains. To push past natural order and grasp for unearned abundance is to guarantee loss. Yet the Babylonian tale added a second part, nearly forgotten in later retellings. After the loss, a prophecy declared that true abundance was not in the eggs themselves, but in recognizing the limits of divine gifts. The king, stripped of wealth and power, wandered the fields as a beggar until he learned to honor the gifts he was given, to take no more than fate allowed, and to always act with gratitude and restraint. It was a lesson the royal scribes meant not only for kings, but for anyone who dreamed of controlling fortune or bending the will of the gods. Still, within the tablet's cracks and faded edges, I saw clues suggesting this story carried yet another secret, one about jars that imprison desires, spirits, or curses, waiting to be unleashed. The next link in the mosaic of myth would draw me toward the rivers of ancient Oman, where fishermen and demons bartered in shadows, and wishes twisted free from seals that were never meant to break. The tale of the golden goose carried within its cuneiform lines a cryptic reference to another parable, one encoded in warnings about vessels, spirits, and the cost of curiosity. Following this thread led me to Oman, to a coastal museum holding artifacts salvaged from ancient maritime trade routes that connected Mesopotamia with distant lands. Among them was a collection of clay jars, unremarkable at first glance, labeled as storage containers for grain or oil. But under close examining, the surfaces revealed something extraordinary. Each jar bore intricate seals stamped deep into the clay, symbols of containment, invocations meant to trap rather than preserve. These were not mundane storage vessels. They were prisons designed to hold spirits, demons, or forces too dangerous to destroy but too powerful to leave free. The curator, unfamiliar with the inscription's deeper purpose, mentioned they had been common throughout the region, used in rituals she could not fully explain. I knew better. These jars were part of a tradition stretching back to the earliest Sumerian and Akkadian rites, where binding spells captured malevolent entities and sealed them away from the mortal realm. One jar in particular drew my attention. Its seal bore the mark of Solomon, or rather, its Mesopotamian precursor, the sacred sigil used by priest kings to command demons and compel obedience from the unseen world. The accompanying legend, pieced together from Persian, Jewish, and later Arab sources, told of a fisherman who cast his nets into the Euphrates and pulled up not fish, but a sealed jar heavy with age and covered in warnings. Ignoring the inscriptions, driven by need or curiosity, the fisherman broke the seal. From the jar erupted a demon, a servant of the Underworld bound for 1,000 years, his form towering and terrible, composed of smoke and fire and ancient rage. Grateful at first for his release, the demon offered the fisherman a wish, a single favor in exchange for freedom. But the texts warned, demons are bound by neither gratitude nor honor. The wish, no matter how carefully worded, would twist into tragedy. Some versions describe the fisherman tricking the demon back into the jar. Others end with the fisherman's destruction, consumed by the very force he unleashed. The story, later absorbed into the Arabian Nights as The Fisherman and the Jinni, was far older than Islamic tradition, rooted deep in Babylonian understanding of the cosmos as a place where spiritual forces constantly pressed against the boundaries separating order from chaos. The jars were not metaphors. They were real tools used in rituals to trap diseased demons, vengeful spirits, and entities that threatened communities. To open such a vessel was to invite calamity, to gamble with powers mortals were never meant to control. As I held one of the ancient jars, feeling its weight and the faint etchings beneath my gloved fingers, I wondered how many had been opened over the millennia. How many fishermen, farmers, or treasure hunters had broken seals they did not understand, releasing what should have remained bound. The lesson encoded in the story was timeless. Some doors, once opened, cannot be closed. Some forces, once freed, cannot be reasoned with or controlled. And curiosity, while a virtue in many contexts, becomes a vice when it ignores the warnings carved by those who came before. But the jars also held another secret, one the curator mentioned in passing. A list, inscribed on a fragment of tablet stored alongside the vessels, naming other sealed containers, other demons, still buried beneath the sands of Iraq, waiting in silence for someone foolish or desperate enough to set them free. The thought chilled me as I left the museum, the salty breeze off the Gulf mingling with the weight of ancient warnings. The next fragment of my journey would take me to Berlin, where 12 priestesses danced in the underworld, their worn shoes revealing mysteries the living were never meant to witness. Berlin greeted me with gray skies and the weight of history pressing against museum walls. I had come for a fragment recently recatalogued in the Pergamon Museum's collection, a tablet that had languished misidentified for nearly a century. When I finally held it beneath archival lights, the cuneiform told a story both familiar and unsettling, one that would rewrite my understanding of a seemingly innocent fairy tale. The text described a ritual performed by 12 priestesses dedicated to Erased Epochs, the formidable queen of the Underworld, sovereign of the realm the Mesopotamians called Kur or Irkalla. This was no gentle afterlife. It was a place of dust and shadow, where souls drank from muddy waters and ate clay, separated from the living by 7 forbidding gates, each one stripping away another layer of mortal identity. Every night, under the veil of darkness, the 12 priestesses descended through a hidden passage beneath the temple. The text was explicit. They walked the boundary between worlds, entering a sacred cavern that served as a threshold to the underworld itself. There, on cold stone floors polished smooth by centuries of ritual movement, they danced until the first light of dawn threatened to break the connection between realms. The dance was not celebration, it was work, sacred and exhausting. By moving in patterns older than memory, the priestesses maintained the boundary separating the living from the dead, ensuring that the spirits of the underworld remained in their appointed place and did not spill into the world above. The rituals honored Erased Epochs, acknowledging her absolute authority over death and her role in preserving cosmic order. Without these nightly observances, the ancient Mesopotamians believed chaos would seep upward, the dead would walk among the living, and the natural cycle of existence would collapse. Each morning, the priestesses returned to the temple exhausted, their shoes worn to tatters from dancing on unforgiving stone. The king, suspicious of their nightly disappearances and the mystery surrounding their haggard appearances, sent a trusted spy to follow them. The spy discovered the hidden passage, witnessed the sacred dance, and reported everything. But rather than punishment, the priestesses received honor and increased offerings. Their work was recognized as essential, a service protecting not just the temple, but the entire civilization from forces beyond human control. The fairy tale of the 12 dancing princesses, told across Europe with countless variations, preserved the structure perfectly. The nightly journeys, the worn shoes, the secret passage, the suspicious king, the spy who followed. But the meaning had been utterly transformed. What was once sacred became mysterious. What was necessary became forbidden. The underworld became a magical ballroom, and the priestesses became princesses seeking pleasure rather than performing duty. Yet beneath the sanitized European versions, the Babylonian truth persisted. Some women walk between worlds. Some carry burdens invisible to those they protect. And some dances are not for joy, but for survival, maintaining boundaries that most never see but all depend upon. As I stood in the museum, the tablet cool beneath my fingers, I thought of every priestess whose name was lost, who descended into darkness night after night so that others might live safely in the light. The thread connecting ancient ritual to modern story was gossamer but unbroken, woven by hands that understood the weight of sacred responsibility. But there were more threads to follow, more stories that had transformed as they traveled through time. The next would lead me to Jerusalem, where marriage rituals concealed tests of strength, wisdom, and survival, and where the true bride had to prove herself worthy not of love, but of life itself. Jerusalem welcomed me with stone gold light and the weight of ancient prayer echoing through narrow streets. I had come to meet a scholar specializing in marriage customs spanning Mesopotamia, ancient Israel, and the wider Near East. In her small, book-lined office overlooking the old city, she showed me a document that would unravel yet another fairy tale I thought I understood. It was a Babylonian marriage contract, dating to the old Babylonian period, but unlike any I had seen before, alongside the standard provisions for dowry, bride price, and legal obligations, it included a section describing 3 tasks the bride had to complete before the wedding could proceed. These were not symbolic gestures. They were tests, designed to ensure the bride possessed the strength, wisdom, and perception necessary to survive in a world where women had limited power and faced constant danger. The first task required the bride to weave a garment from nettles without speaking for an entire lunar cycle. This was a test of patience and silence, qualities essential for a woman navigating the complex social and political dynamics of a household where her voice might be unwelcome or dangerous. The nettles themselves were painful to handle, symbolizing the suffering she would endure without complaint. The second task demanded she retrieve a golden ring from the bottom of a deep well, descending into darkness to claim what was hers. This tested courage and willingness to confront fear, to venture into places others would not go in order to secure her future and her family's prosperity. The third and most challenging task required her to identify her true groom from among 12 identical men, all dressed the same, all silent, all standing before her without distinguishing marks. She had only her perception, her intuition, and her wisdom to guide her. This was the ultimate test. Could she see clearly, beyond appearance and deception, to recognize truth when everything conspired to obscure it? If the bride failed any task, the marriage contract was void. She would return to her father's house, her reputation intact, but her future uncertain. But these tasks were not arbitrary cruelty. They were designed by the goddess Inanna herself, or so the contract claimed, as part of her sacred mysteries, ensuring that women entering marriage were prepared not just to be wives, but to be survivors. The fairy tales of the true bride, scattered across European folklore, preserved these tests in softened form. The silent weaving appears in tales like The Wild Swans, where a princess must weave shirts from nettles without speaking to break a curse. The descent into the well echoes in Mother Holle, and countless other stories where heroines must brave darkness to claim their reward, and the test of recognition, choosing the true prince from among decoys, appears again and again, from Cinderella to East of the Sun, West of the Moon. But the Babylonian original carried a different weight. These were not romantic adventures. They were survival training, encoded in ritual and sanctified by religion. The tasks taught brides that silence could be strength, that courage meant descending into darkness, and that clear sight was more valuable than beauty or charm. In a patriarchal world where women had few protections and many enemies, these skills could mean the difference between life and death. The scholar handed me a translation of the contract's final clause, and I read it carefully. The tasks were not given by the groom or his family. They were administered by priestesses of Inanna, who evaluated the bride and determined whether she had passed. This was women's knowledge, passed from priestess to bride, a system of feminine power hidden inside a patriarchal institution. As I left Jerusalem that evening, the sun setting over ancient stones, I thought of all the brides who had woven nettles until their hands bled, who had descended into wells with pounding hearts, who had stood before 12 identical men and trusted their instinct to guide them. Their stories had been transformed into fairy tales, made safe for children, stripped of their power and purpose, but the truth remained, waiting in contract tablets and temple records, a reminder that some tests are not about romance, they are about survival. And some knowledge, once encoded by women for women, can never be entirely erased. But there was one more story, one final thread connecting Babylon to every culture that came after. And it would lead me back to where all stories began, to a garden, a fruit, and the moment when knowledge became both blessing and curse. My journey had traced a thread through temples, tombs, and forgotten archives, but all paths led inexorably to one place, Eridu, the oldest city in the world, where humanity first learned to build, to worship, and to question. The ruins lie in southern Iraq, half swallowed by desert sands, their ancient bricks crumbling under the weight of 5,000 years. Yet beneath the silence, something waits, patient and profound. I arrived at dawn, when the light paints the ziggurat mounds in shades of amber and dust. Eridu was sacred to Enki, god of wisdom, fresh water, and secret knowledge, the deity who loved humanity enough to warn us of the coming flood and teach us the arts of civilization. Here, in the shadow of his temple, I found the oldest version of a story that would echo through every culture that came after. It was carved into foundation stones, placed where only those excavating the deepest layers would find them. The inscription described a garden, not of trees and flowers as we imagine, but of sacred groves surrounding the temple, irrigated by canals fed from the Abzu, the primordial freshwater ocean beneath the earth. In the center of this garden grew a single fruit tree, called the Apple of Knowing, though the Sumerian word suggested something closer to pomegranate or fig, sacred to the goddess Inanna and forbidden to all but the gods. A priestess named Adapa, curious and bold, ate the fruit against divine prohibition. The text was explicit about what happened next. Her eyes opened, not metaphorically, but literally, and she saw the structure of reality itself, the hidden mechanisms by which the gods maintained order over chaos, the true nature of mortality and divinity, the knowledge that separated the eternal from the ephemeral. This was not simple disobedience, it was transgression of cosmic boundary, a mortal glimpsing what was reserved for immortals alone. The gods, particularly Enlil, who valued order above all, were furious. Humanity, through Adapa, had tasted divine wisdom and could no longer be trusted to remain in their appointed place. The decision was made to cleanse the earth, to send a great flood that would erase humanity and the dangerous knowledge they now carried. Only Enki, who loved his creation, warned Utnapishtim to build a boat and preserve life through the deluge. But the knowledge did not die. It was encoded, hidden in stories, passed down through priestesses and scribes who understood that some truths must survive even when empires fall. The story of the garden, the forbidden fruit, the exile, and the flood became foundational to Mesopotamian identity, explaining why humans toil, why we suffer, and why we are separated from the divine realm we once knew. The narrative migrated outward, carried by traders and conquered peoples, transforming as it traveled. In Hebrew scripture, it became the Garden of Eden, with Adam and Eve replacing Adapa, and the serpent representing the temptation of wisdom. In Greek myth, it echoed in Prometheus stealing fire, Pandora opening the forbidden box. In countless fairy tales, the motif appears as the forbidden room, the poisoned apple, the knowledge that costs everything to gain. Snow White, poisoned by an apple that brings death like sleep. Eve, exiled for eating fruit that opens her eyes. The pattern is always the same: forbidden knowledge, cosmic punishment, and the understanding that curiosity, while human and even admirable, carries consequences that ripple through generations. I stood among the ruins of Eridu as the sun climbed higher, feeling the weight of every story I had traced. They were not separate myths scattered by chance across the world. They were fragments of a single narrative, a warning encoded by the oldest civilization we know, preserved through collapse and conquest, softened by time but never entirely forgotten. The apple represents knowledge, yes, but also the moment when humanity chose to see clearly, even knowing the price. And that choice, made in a garden in ancient Sumer. As I prepared to leave, one final revelation waited, hidden in the margins of a ritual text I had overlooked. And this discovery would tie every fragment together, revealing the thread that connected them all, and the source from which every fairy tale ultimately sprang. On my final night in Eridu, exhausted but unable to sleep, I returned to my tent and laid out everything I had gathered over 3 years of searching. Photographs, rubbings, translations, fragments of clay and stone. I arranged them chronologically, geographically, thematically, looking for the pattern I knew must exist. And then, in the lamplight, surrounded by the ghosts of ancient voices, I saw it. The thread that connected them all, gossamer but unbreakable, spun by hands I could finally name. Every story I had traced led back to one source: the temple of Inanna in Uruk, the goddess of love and war, of heaven and earth, of transformation and boundaries. She was the patron of priestesses, the keeper of sacred mysteries, the deity who walked between worlds and taught mortals to do the same. And her temple for over 1,000 years had been the center of a tradition that would shape every culture that came after. The priestesses of Inanna were not merely religious functionaries. They were the keepers of knowledge, the transmitters of wisdom, the ones who encoded truths too dangerous or too sacred to speak openly into narratives that could survive the collapse of empires. When Uruk fell, when Babylon burned, when the old gods were forgotten and new religions rose to replace them, the stories remained, changed, softened, adapted to new contexts, but fundamentally intact. The tower and the priestess who defied divine knowledge, the breadcrumbs in the forest, the glass slipper at midnight, the sleeping city beneath the thorns, the beast who loved despite his form, the spindle that pierced the veil, the red shoes that danced to death, the house made of bread, the wolf in disguise, the golden goose and endless greed, the demon in the jar, the dancers in the underworld, the bride's impossible tasks, the forbidden fruit. Every single story bore the mark of Inanna's mysteries, lessons encoded by her priestesses to teach survival, wisdom, caution, and the understanding that some boundaries exist for reasons we must respect. The fairy tales we tell our children are not inventions. They are memories, cultural memories, of a time when these lessons were taught in temples, when young girls became priestesses and learned the secrets of walking between worlds, when knowledge was both gift and burden, passed down through generations of women who understood that some truths cannot be spoken directly but must be wrapped in story to survive. The connections between Mesopotamian mythology and later traditions, including biblical narratives and European folklore, have been recognized by scholars, but the full extent of this transmission, the deliberate encoding of knowledge by priestesses of Inanna, has remained hidden until now. These were not accidental parallels or universal archetypes arising independently. They were teachings, systematically preserved and transmitted, protected by being made to seem like entertainment, like stories for children, when in fact, they carried the accumulated wisdom of the oldest civilization we know. I sat in my tent as dawn approached, feeling the weight of every priestess whose name was lost, who had carried these stories through conquest and collapse, who had ensured that the knowledge would survive even when the temples fell and the goddess was forgotten. They succeeded beyond measure. Their stories reached every corner of the world, translated into every language, told to every generation. We think we know these tales, but we have forgotten what they were meant to teach us. That knowledge, once glimpsed, changes everything. That some boundaries protect us rather than confine us. That curiosity is sacred but must be tempered with wisdom. That transformation requires sacrifice. That survival demands skills we no longer recognize as sacred. That women, particularly, carry knowledge through dark times, encoding it in ways that look innocent but are anything but. As the sun rose over the ruins of Eridu, painting the ancient bricks in shades of fire and gold, I understood that my journey was not ending but beginning. These 15 fragments were only the start. There are more stories, more connections, more threads to follow. The priestesses of Inanna left us a legacy vast enough to spend lifetimes exploring, and I have only scratched the surface. But I have learned one thing on this path, standing in the shadows of forgotten temples, holding fragments of clay that carry voices 4,000 years old. History doesn't whisper, it waits. And when you learn to listen, when you learn to see the patterns others have missed, the past speaks with a clarity that can reshape everything you thought you knew. The fairy tales are not fantasies, they are archives, and the stories we tell our children are the oldest knowledge we possess, waiting for someone to remember what they truly mean. As the last echoes of ancient voices settle around the embers of my campfire, a sense of awe takes root deeper than the shadows stretched by dawn. Each artifact unearthed, every story unraveled, is not merely a relic or a myth. It is a testament to the endurance of human memory. The fairy tales that flicker beneath lamplight are not entertainment alone. They are encoded wisdom, fragments of the oldest civilization, sheltering truths too precious to perish when temples fell or cities vanished. Across thousands of years, the priests and especially priestesses of Mesopotamia have woven caution and courage into the warp and weft of their sacred narratives. Lessons meant to teach survival, respect for boundaries, curiosity, and resilience passed through the fires of time, disguised in stories for children, softened but never erased. When empires rose and collapsed, when new gods replaced the old, the stories lingered, transformed, adapted, but vital as ever. The echoes of the goddess Inanna's mysteries ripple into our own era. Their shapes visible in fairy tales and forgotten fragments, their meaning always waiting for rediscovery. This journey changes the explorer and the listener. With each discovered connection, every tale reclaimed from dust, there is a realization: history does not simply offer facts, it gifts us with questions. Who first told these stories and why? How many times have memories been hidden for safety, only to re-emerge when the world was ready to hear them? The threads binding Rapunzel's tower to a priestess's vigil, the breadcrumbs of Gilgamesh to children lost in a wild forest, spool through time without breaking. Each step forward along these paths, each fragment translated, feels like listening to the world for the first time. Now, as the fire burns low and the night of the expedition draws near its end, let us linger with this truth. History is not static or silent. It lives in the tales parents whisper to their children, in the warnings and hopes sewn gently into bedtime narratives, and in the inexhaustible curiosity that drives us to seek, to question, to remember. For the explorer, and for all who walk beside him on this path, there remains the certainty that we are part of a much larger journey. One that began before memory and continues into every dawn. And perhaps, just perhaps, the stories we carry onward will inspire the next seeker, watching the embers and listening for voices beneath the stars.